got it. She's gonna love it. Let's go.
Whoa, how'd you find a card so fast?
I am a speaker of lady language. I hear their voices in my head, much like Beethoven heard music.
No, I think those are just voices.
Either way, I've got a card, and you don't.
I'm trying to find one with the right words. I can't find one that really describes how I feel.
Here, this one.
This one. This is the one.
Yeah.
Okay. Sugar is sweet and so is honey. I bought you this card because I had no money.
That is so you.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. It's not me.
What are you trying to say?
I need a card that says, I don't deserve you. I never have, and I never will. From the moment that I first saw you, I knew that I wanted to be with you, to know you, to understand you. I am humbled that you chose me. I have married out of my league, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't recognize that fact. And I've never taken our vows lightly. What do I say to the mother of my children, my best friend, my soulmate? I love you can just sound so cliche and trite, but it's the only words that I know. I love you. I mean, that would be a card, you know? That would be a card that I'd want to buy. What's the matter? What happened?
Don't look at me.
Okay.
Look away.
I have. What's the matter?
It's like I'm a swimming pool, and your words are like cannonballs landing. Pull yourself together, man. Attention, everybody. We are in the presence of a true wordsmith.
No, we're not.
Allow his words to be the wings on which your cards fly.
No.
I want what he's having.
Okay, we need to go. We need to go right now.
I've got an idea. We'll get those cards that are blank on the inside, and we'll write your words on them, and then we'll give them to our ladies. But we have to write in calligraphy.
I'm just going to take your card.
Wait, what was that part about the true soulmates? I need a pen. I gotta write this down. That stuff is gold. That'll give me a whole Sunday of football.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Welcome. My name is Dustin. Thank you guys so much for carving out a little bit of time from your weekend to join us here at our marriage event. We're really excited about what we have for you guys tonight. There will be a panel discussion up here in a little bit led by Scott and his wife Tammy Tilly. They'll be up here in just a little bit doing that. But before we dive in, going to do a little bit of a game, a little bit of an activity, something that you would probably hear or something that you'd be familiar with at a wedding. You know how they do like the longest married, you stop dancing, that kind of a thing. So we're going to have everybody stand up if you could. I'm sorry if you're not quite done with your pie, but you don't have to do anything else other than stand and sit, so not a lot of movement. So we are actually we're going to give away a raffle, a prize for the couple that was engaged the shortest amount of time before they got married. So if you were engaged for a year or longer before you got married, you can take a seat. And if guys you can't remember, maybe you should take a seat. If you were engaged 10 months or longer, please take a seat. If you were engaged 8 months or longer, please take a seat. Six months. 5 months. It's hard to tell if all the, okay. 4 months. Got just 2 couples left. 3 months. 2 months? Okay, both at 2 months. Oh, I was afraid that was going to happen. Okay, now we'll just do between you guys. You know what? We've got prizes for both. We're going to give you guys both a prize. Can you guys give it up for these 2 couples? Awesome. Just out of curiosity, how long was it exactly? Do you know? Just under 3 months. You guys? Okay. That's impressive. That is awesome. Congratulations. How long have you guys been married then? 3 years. Okay. 20 years. Okay. Awesome. Very cool. We'll get you both you guys something before the night's over. Make sure you find me because I've only got one up here right now. So I'm going to invite Scott and Tammy Tilly up here in just a second. But before I do, I'm just going to pray for our night and just pray that some of the stuff that we talk about, some of the stuff that we learn from these couples, that we can just take and apply to our own marriages. I mean, this has been a crazy year, especially this last year, where we've seen a lot of different marriages, affected in a lot of ways. I think COVID brought some families really closely together, and I think COVID also was really, really hard for other families. So I think now is a time more than ever where we really need to invest in our marriages. And we know that's hard. I know my wife and I now with 3 kids, sometimes just time together is harder and harder to find, but it's things like this that we can use to invest, I think is a really, really good thing. So I'll pray, and then we'll go ahead and get started. God, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you so much for this opportunity to gather together in this place to learn just more about the meaning of marriage and what your intention, what your design for marriage ultimately is, and how we can use it, God, just to ultimately bring you glory through everything that we do through it. God, we know that it can be incredibly difficult. It can be incredibly challenging at times, but we just trust in you to continue to lead, guide, and direct us in our marriages. I pray that you just continue to go before every marriage that's represented in this room, and God, just bless them as they learn, and God, then as they leave tonight, and help us just to use what we hear from here to apply to our own marriages. God, we love you so much, and pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good evening. This is my wife, Tammy.
This is my husband, Scott.
Tammy and I went to Anderson University together, but we did not date until after college.
We've been married a whopping 31 years.
Tammy grew up in the hills of West Virginia.
And Scott grew up in the flatlands of Indiana.
And although Tammy really enjoys people, she's more of an introvert than me.
And Scott can appreciate a little downtime, but he's very extroverted.
You don't have to say it quite that strongly.
It's true.
Tammy's more of a night person. In fact, she considers sleep her spiritual gift.
Scott's a morning person, and sleep for him is just kind of a necessary thing you got to do.
So we're obviously 2 very different people. And we've worked very hard to not allow our differences to push us apart, but to bring us together. And we've worked very hard to do that by having Christ central in our marriage and in our home.
Yeah, so we don't want you guys to think that we have, just because we've been married for 31 years, that we have just lots and lots of wisdom. We have a little bit, but we have some other people to help us as well. We have done a lot of counseling and premarital counseling with other couples, and there's one book that we go back to over and over again in these sessions, and it's called The Meaning of Marriage, and it's by Tim Keller. And if you ever have the opportunity to read that book together, it will stretch you and really give you lots to think about and talk about. But what we're doing this evening really comes from that book. We'll give you some quotes from that book, and then we'll unpack it a little bit, and then we'll ask our panel some questions. We do have a panel, and I believe Scott's going to introduce them now.
I am. They're going to come from the back of the room. We have Andrew and Andrea Hauser, who have been married 15 years. We have Scott and Lauren Matthews, our newlyweds. They've been married 9 years. And then we have Mike and Jerry Bailey, who have been married 42 years.
Gosh, that's older than I am. By the way, don't you guys just love those pictures on the table of different people, and I just got to say, I did not choose the wedding picture that Scott chose. So we're the picture that you can't see our faces because we're kissing.
It's because that's just what we do all the time.
Hi, guys. So, the first thing we want to talk about is this idea of a covenant marriage. The Bible talks about marriage being a covenant between a man and a wife and their God. Our culture likes to think of marriage more as a contract. And when there's a contract, it's more about what's in it for me, what do I get out of this, and if you don't meet your end of the bargain, then I get out of the contract. When God's Word teaches us that marriage in a covenant commitment, it's legally binding, and Christ is at the center of this, and it is eternal. And so it's kind of this combination of law and love. And I want to read a quote about that. Tim Keller writes, "In any relationship, there will be a frightening spell in which your feelings of love dry up. And when that happens, you must remember that the essence of marriage is that it is a covenant, a commitment, a promise of future love. So what do? You do the acts of love despite your lack of feeling. You may not feel tender, sympathetic, and eager to please, but in your actions you must be tender, understanding, forgiving, and helpful. And if you do that, as time goes on, you will not only get through the dry spells, but they will become less frequent and deep, and you will become more constant in your feelings. This is what can happen if you decide to love." So that is the idea of covenant. Here's my question to the panel. And the panel, you guys get about 8 minutes, and we're going to start with you guys when I ask this question. And then we're going to turn to you guys and give you about 5 minutes to talk with your spouse. So the question is, so on your wedding day, you made promises to one another. And here now, you've been married for some time. You were just starting out on that journey called marriage, and now you have some years behind you. So my question is, how has your understanding of vows changed from your wedding day until now? You guys want to start?
Is this on? Okay.
Yes.
Well, for us, it's changed a lot. When we got married, we were not saved. And we got married very young, and we had a lot of years of struggle. And so I think, looking back when we made our vows, yes, we wanted to get married. We did grow up in churches, both of us, but we had never made that personal commitment. And, really, I never heard the message of salvation. And so we didn't take that into our marriage initially. Once we were saved, though, it kind of really changed our attitude. I think, when we got married, you make your vows, and I think in the back of my mind, you're thinking, well, if it doesn't work out, no big deal. But once we were saved, it just brought a whole new meaning of that word commitment. We fought harder to make things work, and there was no option of a way out. Divorce was not even in our vocabulary. We would make it work no matter what, and that's the mindset we had once we were saved. So, without having God in your marriage as the center of your marriage, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You work a lot harder and you struggle a lot more without him.
So I will just add that I agree with, of course, of everything she said. That's the key. That's key. But I would say that we did have some struggles. She was Catholic. I was not. I was brought up in a Brethren church, and so But in terms of the vows, I never felt that that was not something I was going to struggle with, that was always going to be something I, was going to follow. That didn't mean it was easy. It didn't mean, all it meant was, like she said, I wasn't going to walk away. So God being, after we got saved, like she said, that just brought us together from the standpoint of it's not necessarily her and I, it's him that we both are looking to, and it draws you together naturally. And we we found this River Oaks as a church home, which really kind of allowed us to gel in that regard, because there originally we were doing the Catholic Church one week, my church the other week, and so it was kind of a awkward time. But I think that's basically it.
Somebody else?
Okay, I guess that's me. Is this on? Okay. We kind of experienced a little bit of that. I think the only difference would be that I grew up raised by a single mom. And so, actually, she became single a lot of times. She was like married and divorced 3 or 4 times, which that's not like a bash, but it really is the truth. And so I never really saw like what vows look like, how they play out. Like, what does that actually mean in real life? Like, I understand the concept of the ceremony. I understand I'm supposed to say this to you. But I think we really quickly, and he was like super saved, and I was like not. And so that was like another thing that was kind of a struggle. Like when he told me he got saved, I thought there was an emergency. I didn't know. It was like a spiritual thing. And so there was that difference there too. And so for me, it was really hard, and there was like no like possible way for me or him, I think, to imagine what like vows actually mean. Like forever and ever, amen. Like, what is that? What is forever and ever, amen? You know what I mean? And so we struggled a lot, like the first, I don't know, probably 5 years, just trying to figure out like how to, he's trying to get me to understand like what it looks like for the vows to be played out. And I'm still trying to like unlearn what I learned being raised by a single mom, because you go in there and it really is a contract. Like, I'm just here for the party. Like, I know I'm supposed to be here. This is what we do. You know, if it doesn't work out, like you said, well, there's other fish in the sea. That's what, fine. Well, there's no other fish. And so, but my whole point is that I just feel like when I was up there, there's no way to conceptualize what that forever means. And so it just really came down to like us putting the vows into action, and I know that's your favorite thing to talk about, so.
Well, there you go. No, I mean, like when you stand up there, you really don't have an idea when you say, for better or for worse, for richer or for poor. It's just words. But when you are in richer or for poor and for better or for worse, like that's living that out is totally mind blowing, because when you say, yeah, we fall in love, but it's like, I gotta come home even when I don't like her, even when she doesn't like me. Like, we didn't fall in like, we fell in love. So just understanding that commitment, is a whole nother big deal. Commitment just takes it to a whole nother level. So
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say, kind of same along the lines, and the Scott was kind of saying there with, I would, when we got married, I would say, we understood the vows. Obviously, we weren't so naive to be like, oh, everything's going to be just, rainbows and unicorns and all that stuff, right? And so, like, just pure romance. So we understood that much, but I would just say it's for me personally, I think Andrea, you would agree, is like once you start getting some street cred to it and you like start living it and you're in it, that's when you really kind of start to understand what it means. It kind of similar and as we tie this all into like the covenant with Christ and our faith, kind of along similar lines to, and to those of you here that aren't, maybe some of you don't have faith, and that's, cool, and maybe you'll come to know Christ or not, but sort of like when you first get to have that maybe experience, or you understand the depths of sin and grace and forgiveness, and you make the commitment, you're like, all right, it's like this, you say these words and they mean the depths, because like the Spirit moves you, but until you start like going through then the journey, and then you have things come up, good things, bad things, what have you, that's when it really like, you start to really go, I said these things and I mean these things, and they carry this very heavy, well, not heavy sounds like heavy. No, but they carry like very importance and weight, so I don't know.
That was good.
All
You
right,
did
cool.
well.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to give you guys a chance to talk to each other. You have about 5 minutes, and the question is, what has changed in your life between your wedding day and now? What journey have you guys been on? So go ahead and take some time and share.
Okay, now that you're warmed up, so that was the easy question. So I hope you didn't struggle with that too much, because we start getting a little harder from here. If any of you, by the way, you are on a date, so if any of you want water or coffee or anything else, just get up and do that. It's okay. This is a judgment-free zone, and you can just relax and enjoy the evening. So this, except for you guys. Tammy said she was going to go get cake while I was talking. I didn't feel like that was very nice. But so the second point, and really kind of a foundational point that Tim Keller makes in his book, is he asks the question, what is the purpose of marriage? And he explains it as the purpose of marriage is really to replicate the gospel. I know you hear that and you go, what in the world does that mean in my marriage? I can't comprehend that thought. So I'm going to read a quote that Tim Keller has. It'll also be here on the screen. The gospel is this: we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. Yet at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted by Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. So we learn from the death and the resurrection of Christ. We learn how Christ sacrificed his life while we were still sinners. We learn about grace. We learn about forgiveness. We learn that Christ is someone who always keeps his promises. And Christ died not because we were lovely, but to make us lovely. So when we translate that into our marriages, what we learn is this: what does it mean to sacrifice for our spouse? What does it mean to offer grace and forgiveness to our spouse? What does it mean to keep our promises to our spouse? And what does it look like to help one another become more like Christ? So here's the question for the panel. Knowing and hearing this framework, what are some ways you believe you live out the gospel in your own marriage? I feel like Andrea has a response.
I haven't spoken yet, that's
Yeah.
right. I would say by serving one another. This is hard in this stage of life, especially. As I'm serving 4 little kids day in and day out, sometimes I can forget to serve him. And even when I make small little efforts to serve, I think that maybe shocks you, pulls you up. But also just the way that marriage refines us, as I look back over the past 15 years, we've been through a lot together and individually. We've had some pretty big heartaches, and having him by my side, always knowing that he was always there no matter what, that he wasn't going to walk away. But also realizing that a lot of the heartaches that I had personally, he couldn't heal for me. Like, I had to keep that direct line. I looked to God to heal those things. He couldn't make them go away or make them better, but just having him by my side has been the biggest comfort, and is really what marriage is about. We can't look to our spouse to fix things for us. We can't look to our spouse to heal. We just need to be there for each other. So,
When I think about, how does your marriage just make you more like Christ and those different things, I just think about sacrifice and service. When I was in college, it was all about me. It was all about me and what I was doing. And, I had my own car. I had bought some rims for it. I had a shoe collection. I had cologne out the wazoo. And it was all about me, because I thought I was the man. I had a lot of stuff going on. And then we got married, and I was like, okay, I got a wife to take care of now. I can't have none of that stuff. And man, I'd love to have some of that stuff. but I can't anymore, because it's no longer about me. It's laying myself down and, constantly putting myself on the shelf, and saying, you know what? Sacrifice. And sometimes you got to wake up in the morning and remember that sacrifice. So it's been a big thing.
I did notice you don't have hubcaps on your car anymore.
No, I don't. They're all gone. Yeah, I sold those.
mine got stolen in the church parking lot one time. True story.
Oh, wow.
That's why you got to have rims. See, you got to have 20-inch. All right.
I really wasn't going to comment on this, but I think in thinking about it here a little bit, I think that I think I just lost my point, which happens when you're married for 42 years. No, I know what it was. You know, as we've had recently in some of the services, you know, that the man is supposed to be the head of the household, and but he's supposed to be like Christ. And so I think that's a tough one to be in a position sometimes. And I would say that I would not be a professional at that necessarily all the time. And I think between her and I feel like she makes me a better man, and makes, I think we both can compliment ourselves in following him just based on some of the things that we do. So I guess that's all I could think of at the time.
You know, I think about grace and forgiveness. So I grew up in a very authoritarian home, and I didn't have a voice. And when I made a mistake, well, it was more than a mistake. I was chastised for that mistake. And I grew up feeling like I could never make a mistake. And I carried that into our marriage. And so whenever I would make a mistake, I would be really, really hard on myself, and then would get really shocked when Scott would say, well, that's okay. We can take care of that. And even though we've been married 31 years, I'm sometimes still taken aback by that he extends grace and forgiveness. And I just think that's such a beautiful attribute, and it makes me want to extend grace and forgiveness as well.
If I could just add to that, I don't know if I'm the only like single parent hoodlum up here, but there's just like a lot of like it really does affect like your adult life when you're raised like by a single mom. And so my point was grace and forgiveness too, because my mom, she's amazing. She does, I mean, she's totally different now. We weren't always like believer, like we did like, you know, Easter and stuff like that, like Christmas and all that stuff, but that was really it. But when you're raised by this independent woman, there is a short stick for grace and forgiveness because, you know, you're busy. You've got these kids, you got this job, and you just got all this stuff to do. And so we were just raised to be very just independent girls, and we were left to be independent girls because, you know, you got the oldest, me, you got the littles, and mom's at work, and you just do all the things. So you grow up that way. So then when I got married, like this concept of like, oh, I'm sorry. It was like nauseating. I'm like, how many times do I have to say sorry? Like, you know, like there was just not, something I had to learn was just to like to be more Christ-like, to offer more grace, to offer more forgiveness, because really that was the only way I was going to get to work. I was totally fine with throwing the divorce word around because that's just what I saw. Like, it's just, if it was going to be convenient, that's what we were going to do. And he was like, no, that's not what we're doing. I'm like, well, then, you know, somebody needs to figure it out here. So, yeah, just like grace and forgiveness. It's like this endless thing. It like never ends, I feel like. And I always have to remind myself, like, I didn't deserve it either when Christ gave it to me. So even though I'm not deserving it, I still get it anyway. The least I can do is try to extend that into my marriage to my husband and just see how it goes. So I've gotten better, I think.
I think you're also speaking to the promise part too,
Yeah.
Lauren, because it's the promise that you've made to one another, and Scott has reminded you of that, it sounds like.
Yeah, and like I said, he grew up with two parents. Like, they married till his mom died. Mm-hmm. And like I said, my mom had no problem just leaving you high and dry. So it was a lot of unlearning for me. And that was super, super difficult, especially when you have someone that's like so annoyingly consistent and you're just like, when do I get to give grace? You know what I mean? Like, so anyway, that was fun. The party's over, but that was fun.
Okay, so now it is your turn, and you saw the question up there just a few minutes ago, but when we think about sacrifice, when we think about grace, forgiveness, keeping our promises, helping one another be more like Christ, what are ways you believe you're already doing this in your marriage? And what are ways you believe you could improve upon this in your marriage? 5 minutes, ready, go.
Okay. I hope you guys are having good conversation and, the kind of conversation you can't have when the kiddos are bouncing on the sofas or they're texting you that they need to come home from the party and you need to come get them right now. So we hope you're enjoying the evening. The next topic is about relationship roles. So the Bible teaches us that the man should go hunting and fishing and change the oil and fix the tires or at least kick them, and the wife should do the dishes.
Okay, that's heresy. Now you're speaking heresy.
No, that's not what the Bible says. But the Bible does have something to say about relationship roles. So does Tim Keller in The Meaning of Marriage. So I'm going to quick read the quote, and then I'm going to read Ephesians 5, where Scripture lays out specifically the principles of the husband and the wife. So Tim Keller says, spiritual friendship is eagerly helping one another know, love, serve, and resemble God in deeper and deeper ways. And then Ephesians 5, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For a husband is the head of his wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of his body, the church. As the church submits to Christ, so you wives should submit to your husbands in everything. For husbands, this means love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her to make her holy and clean, washed by the cleansing of God's word. He did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without a spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but feeds and cares for it, just as Christ cares for the church. And we are members of his body.
So for the husbands, this means I'm going to love my wife in a sacrificial way. And I'm going to love my family in a sacrificial way that helps them to live and be more like Christ. And I can't do this on my own. I can only do this through the power of the Spirit of God living in me. And I can only access the Spirit of God living in me by building and pursuing an intentional relationship with God for my own life.
And then I will say for the wives, when our husbands love in this way, then it's easier for us to submit to that kind of spiritual headship. It makes us freer. It makes us feel like we can be who God designed us to be as well. And so the question then for the panel is, how do you work this out in your home? So we have the passage of Ephesians 5, where we're given the principles of spiritual headship and submission, and yet how do we live that out? And I think I want to kick this off. So one of the best things, Scott, one of the biggest gifts he gives to me is every morning, so, because I'm not a morning person, he is. He's gone by the time I get up, and when I go into the living room, I see his coffee cup, and I see his journal, and I see his Bible. And I know that he has spent time with the Lord that morning, and he does that every single morning. And because I know that he has a relationship with Jesus, and he is in the Word, and God is transforming him, then it's easy for me to just submit to his spiritual headship because he is cultivating that relationship. And as he is in the Word, then I'm able to just relax and enjoy being his wife. So, anybody else want to address that?
I would say, just to be honest, I'm really bad at this. When we first got married, I was even worse. I'd say an F in submission. Andrew and I have very similar personalities. In fact, on the Myers-Briggs things, we only have one letter where he's wrong and I'm right. And that letter kind of affects how we make decisions. I'm like an A plus B equals C thing. And he's like, let me look at this from 65 different angles before we make a decision. So it was easy for me early, especially, to kind of be a bulldozer, just I'm not even going to mess around with this. I'm just going to make this decision because it's easier and faster, and I'm impulsive. And so I have gotten better, and maybe a C minus D plus maybe now, partially because God has softened my heart, partially because I'm so busy with little ones that now it's like I find that I need him more to make those big decisions, and I give him room to make those decisions a lot better. But I will say also that he does a really good job of loving me, and he's not I've never once heard him say, "Submit to me, woman," like he's just not that kind of a guy. And so that makes it a lot easier. Yeah, he'd be in trouble, he said. We're both the babies of our family, so we're both pretty feisty. So those early years, we had some good fights, bad fights. But anyways, so yeah, just I guess there really isn't a whole lot of times where where we would make a decision any different, and he always seeks my input on things. But if there are times where we maybe disagree on something, he will make that final decision. So.
Yeah, similar. I struggle with that, or did. I'm getting better, but when I was growing up, my mom was the dominant one, and she was basically the leader, and so I kind of took after her, I guess. So it was really hard for me to step back and let him lead. I'm getting better at that, and I feel like for him too, I know in the mornings when we get up, I'm not much of a morning person either, but sometimes those are when things come to my mind and I want to talk to him about certain things, but I know, he's at the table, he's reading his Bible, and I know that I shouldn't say anything while he's doing that. So that makes me feel good knowing that he's in the Word and he's, feeding himself spiritually. But, I also think, too, we complement each other with things. There's certain things that I guess, people think that men should lead in certain areas. Well, there may be gifts that he has that I don't have and vice versa. So I try to help him with things that maybe he's not as good at, and it works. But yeah, sometimes I do have to really step back and just allow him to lead.
It takes a lot of trust, I think, between spouses, because I think especially if you haven't seen it modeled, it's so hard to figure out how do you even make this work. And I know even for men, it's so much easier for your wife when you give her something worth submitting to. Like, let her do something that's, are you leading the family well? Are you doing something that she wants to come alongside and like, man, this guy he is leading our family well. He is doing that, like you said, Scott is, and it makes it so much easier for her to come alongside you when you have presented something that's worth submitting to. They're saying, okay, I would love to be a part. I would love to just come alongside this and everything. But if you don't see it modeled, it's tough. It's hard to say, oh, how do I even do this? But I think just as a man, just making sure like show my wife how much she's valued to me, just makes that so much easier for her, I believe. So
I just want to add one thing. For what has helped me a ton is because none of that really came natural. But I was in an accountability group for I don't know, over 10, I don't know how many years, but with 3 other guys, and I can't say enough about what that does, because you're able to hear, kind of like what we're doing right now, you're able to hear what other people have gone through, what others are doing or didn't work, and so that's what has allowed me to be maybe a better leader and show her the things that I need to do that God wants us to do. So if you're not doing that, I can't say enough about it. That's something you should try to do.
Yeah, okay, so I was the problem in the marriage, obviously. So I had to do a risk assessment. Like, I had to weigh the pros and cons of what that meant for me to allow my husband to lead. Because a lot of women, I think we all are fully aware that we are capable of doing what men do. Like, I think the issue for me was just proving it. And I think that's the issue for a lot of women. And for me, it really just came down to like a leap of faith. Because he was consistent, and I appreciated that. he's great, whatever. And so it made it easier. It just made it easier to like be willing to do it like he was, and to trust that like if I allow him to make this decision on his own, I'm 99.9% sure it's going to be the right decision, because there has yet to be a time to where it hasn't been a right decision, even if I didn't like it. And so after I did my little risk assessment or whatever, I decided, okay, I was going to be a submissive wife. And like if you're thinking about it or like on the balance beam with it now, like the benefits way outweigh like the cons of not being like a wife that allows her husband to lead. Like I reap so many benefits, you guys, just because he's a good husband. Like it's unreal. I tell him all the time, I'm like, you just keep doing the right thing, because just great things keep happening, and I just get all these rewards, and like people mail us money and cars, and this is wonderful. Like, and so anyway,
Well,
I think
that
God
doesn't happen
just.
to us. We're not doing something. We're not good. I'm not doing it right.
I think God just really honors when like the husband is doing the right thing and the wife is trusting the process, and just good things happen, and it's a good time.
Well, and I'd like to say too, I mean, I think when it comes to like the submission or the leadership, there's a lot of, unfortunately, over the years, that's gotten kind of abused in the context of it. And so we have this like idea in our mind sometimes when we hear this, that it's like the man makes all the key decisions and all this, that, and the other, and it's kind of like, well, it's not really about that. Like sometimes like leading the family, and I don't say I do this enough probably, and so I'm not making myself sound great, but like sometimes like leading the family is like like we talked about, here's like leading with like sacrifices or acts of servitude that are even like small for your spouse, for Andrea, or and that's a way to lead, to then help validate like the submission back, or that respect back. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, society affects us, right? Like of stereotypes, and how we should be, how like men have to be and act this certain way, or women like have to feel that if that they're unfortunately not being heard if sometimes the opinion doesn't come out, but that's a byproduct of just time and time again it being viewed wrong, right? So like then we get forced into these boxes, and then it just creates all this like unnecessary tension and friction. And so I guess I just try to look at like I mean like almost like a mutual submission to one another, like thinking about the other person, trying to put them ahead, and knowing there's times where like seasons in life that you as we're learning, married crazy almost 15 years, which is crazy, and I couldn't say this early on, but it's like you learn, there's times in life where like I'm going through stuff, and I'm not maybe being the best that I should be, and Andrew's going through some stuff, and we're giving each other that grace and being able to, I guess, lead that way, and then trust on certain key decisions or major things like that's gonna be a part of God's plan. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's good.
That's really good. Thank you. So now you guys get to talk amongst yourselves, and again, the question is, how do you take some of these concepts from Ephesians 5 and talk about them? What does that mean? How do you live that out between your spouse and you, or maybe how can you do better? So go ahead.
So, men, you will be so happy because this next section is sex. And I know that you've been wondering about this all night long. Are we going to talk about this? Well, we're going to talk about this. However, we're going to talk about it in the context of the Meaning of Marriage book that Tim Keller wrote. And he defines sex within a marriage as an act of covenant renewal. And he says this: sex is glorious not only because it reflects the joy of the Trinity, but also because it points to the eternal delight of soul that we will have in heaven, in our loving relationships with God and one another. Romans 7:1 tells us that the best marriages are pointers to the deep, infinitely fulfilling, and final union we will have with Christ in love. No wonder, as some have said, that sex between a man and a woman can be a sort of embodied out-of-body experience. It's the most ecstatic, breathtaking, daring, scarcely to be imagined look at the glory that is our future. I love what Tim Keller says when he actually draws a parallel between sex in marriage, within the context of marriage, and communion with Christ. Because he says we renew our marriage covenant through the act of sex, which communicates that I belong completely and only to you. This can be true only within the context of marriage. So just as we renew our commitment to Christ and our covenant with him when we take communion, we're reminded of the covenant that we've made with Christ and remembering the sacrifice he made for us. Tim Keller is paralleling this a little bit with sex within marriage is a reminder of the covenant you've made with your wife and the love that you have for her and only her. So, with that said, panel, how are you being intentional to protect your sexual relationship within your marriage in this sex-saturated culture?
I think it's so important just to remember, I take my wife, mentally, I take my wife with me everywhere I go. You know, wherever if I'm scrolling Facebook, if I'm, looking at something, if I'm watching, I'm thinking, if my wife was sitting here, would I do that? Would I do this? So just that mental protection, I think, is just so important. And we were talking about this earlier. I always think about, as a man, there's temptation. There's temptation everywhere. And I'm constantly reminding myself that my wife is enough. She is enough. And I think it's so important as men to remember that even when the sex ain't there, she's enough. Even in that time frame, she's enough for me. And that to me, those are the barriers, those are the guardrails that I put to protect myself, to protect our intimacy. So important.
That's good.
I think a lot of the time when it comes to like temptation and stuff like that, one way that we are super heavy and intentional about protecting just our intimacy in general, because sex is always like the end goal, even if it's you do outside of marriage, whatever, but before that are your emotions. And so we protect those by not divulging like personal feelings or emotions with like opposite gender people. If I have a problem with my spouse, the guy at the gym doesn't need to, he's not my bestie at the time to like divulge all my drama I have with my husband, or like he has no business sharing with a female coworker like his attitude with me for the day or whatever. Because we all just know over time that relationships build, and we know that emotions are involved. We just know where this is going. Like, I don't have to tell you. You've seen a million movies. So that's one way that we do it. And then some of you are going to love this, some of you are going to hate this, but I'm going to say it. Okay.
Uh-oh.
So it's fine. It's totally appropriate.
Okay.
Okay. So I understand that there are like different stages of like sexual needs in life. So when we had the kids, like when you're like a newer mom and you've got other ones pulling on you and whatever, like, I'm sorry, but I don't want to have sex with you. But I had to just like keep reminding myself, like, okay, he is like a grown man, and I think this is just like a fundamental basic need that I'm just going to have to provide. He's being serviced, don't worry. So a lot of the time, like, like as a mom with like all these littles, like I had to just like be like, okay, Lauren, just take one for the team. Like, it's just a need. Like, and just talk yourself, because like you don't want to do. I mean, okay, we don't want to do it all the time. And anyway, so just like reminding myself, like as a grown man, I think this is like an innate need. So I just need to like be cognizant of that, and I'm just gonna have to service him. So I think it's biblical too. So like not to withhold sex or whatever, or weaponize it. He likes to say. So that's all I have on that.
Well, after 42 years, I don't think I've ever grown out of that. But I will say, and we kind of chatted about this before, was the fact that, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, trying not to put yourself in a position where, you know, it could be a problem. And, you know, doing what I do for work, which was do electrical work. I'm in people's houses all the time, and I honestly, I just thank God that I've never been put in a position where I felt like they were coming on or anything like that, or you know, so I feel fortunate about that because I know guys that have. Anyways, I think, and the accountability thing, once again, I bring that up, that's helped. So, and Scott, I like what you said, you know, your wife is, you know, that's part of our vow, so.
And I did like how he said about the covenant renewal thing, about how it's almost like it is a holy experience. And I'm not going to say that sex will solve all your marital issues, but it does seem to solve a lot of them. You know, some days there's just days where you're just at each other, you know, and it might just be a sign that it's time. It's been a little too long.
Yeah, and I would say too, I think, you know, touched on here a couple times. I mean, we live in a much more with like gender equality, or like men and women like working in business or working whatever. Like there's more opportunity to like have those experiences or opportunity where it's like, you know, somebody might start confiding in you, or you feel the need because you're going through it. And I think you just really gotta, you know, guard against that would be one thing. Or even as guys do, and I'm sure women do this too, but you know, I'm speaking from my experience of just, I don't work at a non-for-profit or Christian organization, or I don't work for the church. So obviously, like, there's going to be jokes and comments made about other women or things, you know, sexual jokes and stuff like that. So I try my best to, you know, if that is the joke topic that, you know, comes up, to like not play into that, right? Like, I feel like that helps with, you know, the intimacy with Andrea and my respect for her. I'm not saying I'm perfect, obviously, but like I try to not involve myself on that. Or, you know, we probably all know something I try not to do too is like the gawking thing. Obviously, like the Bible's pretty, vocal about lust and lusting with your eyes and wandering. But you know, there are a lot of guys that are like, oh, you know, check that out, you know, or they say a lot more than that. I always, you know, I try to deflect that quickly, right? So I'm just thinking from like a real practical whatever. So I would just be like, oh yeah, you know, she's pretty. Yeah, you know, and then just try to like change, let's change subjects, you know, like let's get to something else. But I feel like I try to do those things to help, because I mean, you know, I mean, like I want to try to protect our intimacy in that way. And it's hard. I mean, another thing too is, you know, and it is a very like sex sells, right? Like it is a very sexually charged society, and we are sexual beings, so that's part of it. But I feel like sometimes we get lost in the idea of sex being like, what is it for me, not for the spouse so much. And so we carry those when we get married, whether the age we are, we got married pretty young, but like you're kind of almost hardwired from a young age anymore that like, you know, it's that like sex is about you. It's about like what I'm gonna get from the experience, like what's gonna happen. And so, I mean, I think we both try to do this, but you know, I try to think about Andrea's needs in that, you know, not just my own. It also helps that I'm a man, so my needs are met usually quite a bit, you know, sooner than hers. So like, I mean, come on, let's be honest. But listen,
that microphone.
we're gonna come
So-
on. No, we're gonna, but
So you don't have anything else to say,
no,
right?
no, you know, but I'm saying like, we should be thinking about each other, right? And like that helps cultivate stronger ties within love for one another, and especially with this. So I mean, I feel like that is counter to what
Yes.
society teaches, right? It's outside of the context of the Bible. I mean, you know, we had to go there.
Yeah,
I mean, we
nobody
joked about
heard
it enough.
anything you said after that, just to let you know.
So, a couple things I want to say. So, very, very early on in our marriage, we decided we would never go out to eat alone with a person of the opposite gender. And even if work sometime would require that, we would take somebody else with us. And even our Christian friends pushed back against that a little bit. But it has saved and protected our marriage in so many ways. And so I guess I throw that out there for you guys to consider, especially some of you young folks who are just starting out professionally, is to think about that a little bit. Another thing I know that Scott does, so he has a friend, Brent. Brent and Scott both have subscribed to a website or an app or something that if one of them goes to an inappropriate place, the other person gets informed, who then picks up the phone and says what's going on. And so, you know, I don't even have to think about that or worry about that because I know that Brent and Scott are holding one another accountable, and I'm very grateful for that.
Okay, so now it's your turn. If you want to talk at your tables about what you are doing to protect the sexual relationship within your marriage, and if you're not, maybe ways that you could improve in that area.
Okay, you can talk about that a little more at home too, especially Andrew. Whoa. Okay, just a little closing thought here. Have you ever seen a piece of art or a work in progress and you get little hints along the way of how beautiful that piece of art is going to be? I know Dave is a woodworker, and I'm sure he has this idea in his mind at the beginning of a project. I mean, he built a boat even. And along the way, you probably get little glimpses of, yeah, this is going to be good, or need to tweak this a little bit. I think marriage can feel that way sometimes. This is what Tim Keller says about it. Within a Christian vision of marriage, here's what it means to fall in love. It is to look at another person and get a glimpse of what God is creating, and to say, I see who God is making you, and it excites me. I want to be part of that. I want to partner with you and God in the journey you are taking to his throne. And when we get there, I will look at your magnificence and say, I always knew you could be like this. I got glimpses of it on earth, but now look at you. That's what marriage is within a context of faith, of getting these little glimpses of who God has designed the other person to be, and to help make that happen. So, my question to the panel, how is marriage changing you to be more like Christ?
Well, I'll start. For me, what I've been able to see in Jerry is I can see the gifts that God gave her and how she uses them. I mean, at first, till we kind of talked about this question, I really didn't think about. I don't normally think about it, but it's so easy to see when they're in action now that, and it's just a reminder for me of how God is using her and how we work well together, and to me that's how I get to see quite often, and I like that.
Yeah, the same. I mean, Mike has a lot of gifts, and I see those play out every day, but men and women are different. I mean, that's not any news to anyone here, but I try to recognize those differences, and he's not going to think like I do, and I'm not going to think like he does. So that's where the grace comes in too. But I think, what comes to my mind, in a marriage is living by the fruit of the Spirit. If we can both live by that, boy, that can do wonders for a marriage.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, when I think about that, I think there was a quote in the book, and Scott, you shared this before. It's just, is my wife a better follower of Jesus because of me, or is she a better follower of Jesus in spite of me? Am I doing things that makes her want to become a better follower of Christ? Am I doing the things as a husband that she's saying, okay, I'll follow that, I'll do that? So I think that's just so important. And I know for me, I've dropped a lot of expectations. For me, when we first got married, I had a lot of expectations. I thought she was going to be just like my mom, this woman who's, a great, amazing person, a great, amazing person for Jesus. And that was not the case at first. So, but I dropped those expectations and understand, God is going to make her who he created her to be. Mm-hmm. And since I dropped my expectations, he exceeded my expectations. And it's like, man, I wouldn't want it any other way, So, yeah. But it's just amazing when I stopped trying to make her more like Christ and allowed Christ to make her more like him. He was molding her and shaping her in our marriage, just taking my hands off the wheel. So,
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think there is mutual humility in marriage, and part of that is recognizing that I'm imperfect, so why would I expect perfection from Tammy? And I think people get that mixed up sometimes, and they put unfair expectations on the other person because they think, well, they just need to be more like me. Well, no, they need to be who Christ made them to be, just like you need to be who Christ made you to be. And so, yeah, I think that's really good,
That's
Scott.
part of the glory as well that Tim Keller talks about, is seeing who God designed each one to be, and then to be a participant in that glory is a wonderful thing. Here's your question. It's worded just a little differently, but here's what we want you to talk about. How can you be more intentional in your marriage in helping one another be who God has designed you to be?
Okay, folks, we went over just a few minutes, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to make just a couple quick closing comments, and then Dustin's going to come up. I think he has maybe another giveaway before we send you on your way. But we know that we didn't allow much time for you to talk at your tables tonight. Our hope was that we just prompted you to begin talking about this when you leave here tonight and in the years ahead, that you can just be more intentional with one another in having conversations about real things that will make your marriage last for a lifetime. And we are grateful that you have come, and we're grateful that you spent the evening with us, and I hope that you walk away tonight with something that encourages you and strengthens your marriage. And Dustin, I'll have you come up, and I think you're going to share a few resources as well if people do want some additional help. So,
Thanks, Scott. Can we give these guys that were on the panel just a round of applause? Awesome. Thanks, guys. Yeah, you guys did. That was really cool. That was really good. Definitely got a lot out of that. Hopefully you were encouraged a little bit, challenged a little bit, and that you can take something, from here, to be able to go home and talk about and to work on in your own marriage. So just a couple resources that we'd love to just chat with you guys about real quick before you guys get out of here. One is the book, The Meaning of Marriage. I mean, that's the book that this conversation's been based on tonight. And they also have a devotional. So this is that's up on the screen right now is The Meaning of Marriage devotional. And that's the book. So they're both really good. I've read the book. It's awesome. And then the devotional I have not got my hands on yet, but from what you guys have told me, it's really good too. Is it a year long every day? Okay. Okay. Anyways, there is a devotional with the book. Both are very good. There's also another resource that we have on here. It's called Prepare and Rich. It's actually it's what we use for when we go through marriage counseling here at the church. It's a couples assessment that we give to our couples before they get married, and sometimes you can even take it after you've been married. So if this is something you're interested in, you can talk to either me or Scott about it, or really any of the pastors. I think we've all probably been through it with other couples, but it's a really good resource. I mean, if anything, if you're just wanting kind of a checkup in your own marriage just to take it, I think it's like $35 to take, but it just really addresses a lot of different areas and topics of your marriage. I think it's like 8 or 9 different areas that it kind of covers, and it really, what I love about this assessment is it asks a lot of questions that you wouldn't normally think just to ask just to your spouse in just everyday life. So it gets down to kind of the nitty gritty, and it's really good. It's got a lot of good stuff in the assessment. So if you're interested in taking that, or you would like more information about it, find me or Scott, or I think Drew is here too if you're just interested in learning more a little bit about that. So those are some of the resources that we have. Got one more raffle that I'd like to give away, and I'd like to give it away to the couple who has been married the least amount of time. So instead of standing up and sitting, we're just going to have everybody stay seated. If you've been married 1 year or less, could you stand up? There we go. Perfect. There you go. How long exactly have you guys been married? Okay, awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. And thank everybody for being here. This was a lot of fun for us, I know, hopefully for you guys as well, too. And if you have any other questions, come find us. Once again, can you guys just give these guys a round of applause for being here, helping us out? Awesome. Thank you, guys. Feel free to take the bags that you got when you came in, and you guys are dismissed. Have a great night and a great weekend.